welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers Experience podcast, where we have candid conversations with women sharing their career journeys. And I'm really excited today to have my next guest, who is described as a digital maven, an entrepreneur, a business mentor. She's held several C-suite positions, businesses such as WPP, and is also sitting on many boards as well. Excited to just talk to this renowned leader, coach, advisor to many businesses. And she's currently operating as a management consultant, growth hacker, industry speaker, writer. I could go on and on. Welcome, Mary.
Hello, lovely to meet you properly, Natola. Thank you so much for inviting
Yes.
me on this morning.
I just think with such an impressive bio and eclectic mix of experience, there's so many lessons I think that can be drawn. I'm looking forward to learning, understanding you, and I guess, you should take the time in the podcast to just enjoy and reflect on your achievements so far. We were talking earlier before the podcast started about just, um, acronyms and terminologies and just how over time probably the industry has evolved.
Mhm.
So let's talk about your journey. How did this actually all start?
Well, like a lot of people of my vintage, I was one of the last people probably to get paid to go to university. I come from an interesting background. Unfortunately, for various reasons, my parents split up, and I kind of left home when I was 15 and went to basically live with my best friend and her mum. And we didn't want to, we were quite bright. We were smart kids, but we were also we weren't punks. We were a bit young for that, but we were new romantics. And we sort of got into this whole sort of creative, intellectual world. We're hanging out with people who subsequently became fashion designers and so on and so forth. And I think Mary, her name was Mary as well, and myself, we actually saw ourselves a bit more like, intellectual. And I really wanted to do philosophy and politics at uni, and she wanted to do Russian and history. And we landed up going to night school and having and working. And in a year, we both got our A levels, and I got a place at York, and she got a place at something called the Eastern School of Eastern European and Slavonic Studies. And I think the thing was, because we were able to get a grant, we could do it. It was very difficult, but we could do it without our parents' support. She came from quite a poor background. So long and the short of it was, smart kids. We nothing was impossible for us because we'd done something that was like everyone told us we couldn't do. And I went up to the north of England, which I didn't know at all, and I really loved the people, and I loved what I was studying. And when I left university, I really, I was full of positive energy and ambition, but of course hadn't got a clue what I wanted to do with my degree. So an ex-boyfriend of mine, and subsequently had landed up getting a job in advertising sales on Fleet Street. And I told him, I had these ambitions, and he just said, Mary, you'd be brilliant at selling ads. And I had no idea what he was talking about whatsoever. But when I saw what they were paying graduate trainees, I thought, this actually looks like I could do it, because, I was independent. I didn't have any parental sort of support. So I landed up getting a job at the Observer, and the lady who interviewed me, the ultimate interview, was a lady called Rona Drummond, and she said, "I'm very impressed with you. I'm going to put you on semi-display on the magazine." And I looked at her and I was like, "Great," having not got a clue what she was talking about. And
Yeah, what was semi-display?
semi-display is the half pages and the quarter pages that you would see in a magazine. And so most of those, and the magazine was the Observer magazine, which actually at the time was quite a big force in advertising. And this was in the days when Sunday colour supplements really were the powerhouses after posters and TV. And so I got the job. I was trained within an inch of my life, and which was very, very good. And then I went to small to medium sized advertising agencies, mainly in the London region, on foot, using the tube, whatever, and sold to their clients. And it was everything from, like, in those days it would be like the equivalent of Wren kitchens and like jewellery in the Knightsbridge and stuff. So it was a very broad base of clients, but I didn't ever go on the phone. I was always like going to appointments and meeting people and presenting to them, one to one. And that was an incredible experience because, actually kind of meeting these entrepreneurs, people who ran these organizations, it was very important to them where their advertising dollar went or their advertising pound went, because they, that was an investment they were making in driving customers into their stores or into their environment. So that was a really brilliant way of learning the business on the ground, but also understanding how to use science, which were things like TGI, which is Target Group Index, and other research. This is the early days of analytics. And then one day I was approached by a headhunter who said that there was a company looking for people who'd been trained at national press level, but they were starting off something that was very unusual. It was based on a new technology that had emerged called desktop publishing, which is really the foundation of the internet. And I was intrigued because I loved all the new stuff, and I didn't really like the old school kind of very, very old school newspapers in those days. Very sexist, very, very sexist. Not that was the first and only time I experienced sexism, but anyway, I got the job, and the company was called Redwood. I was their fifth employee, and I suddenly started working on very big circulation publications. The first one was Expression, which was the American Express card members magazine, which had 640,000 circulation in the UK, which was exclusively ABC One males. They might have had a handful of female card members, and it was a massive jump. It was a huge, even though I'd gone on national press and I'd had big circulation, I hadn't actually been dealing directly with like the people who were planning Volvo's advertising campaigns or or like big advertisers. And it had an international dimension as well. So I did that for about 6-8 months and was very successful. Built a team. When all of this was learning on job, we were growing at an incredible rate, being trained all the time. I mean, I do want to emphasize the training aspect of this was absolutely essential because it gave me all these skills. Like they would video us and then play back the video and say, this is what you're doing when you go in and you present to somebody. So you could actually get conscious of how you behaved, how you spoke, what landed, what didn't land. So it was a really, really great experience. But I mean, the thing, at the end of the day was I was just good at it. And I was working with really great people on absolutely amazing brands. I mean, I moved from American Express then to the Marks and Spencer's magazine, which was at the time, it was the biggest female magazine in the UK. It had a circulation of nearly 2 million, and it was card members, at Marks and Spencer card members, but you had to go into the store to get it. Very glossy, very, very upmarket, smelt beautiful. I always remember that. And I was incredibly proud because by that point, I was actually doing the flat plan. And the flat plan, to anybody who's listening to this, is actually where you plan where your ads go and where the editorial goes. So you work very, very closely with the creatives and the editorial people. And that then became my big passion. But my next step was I realized I needed the experience of working on newsstands because that was where how do you sell magazines. So I landed up going to work in a publishing company that, basically was a newsstand publication. And I landed up publishing graphic novels and comics, which is a
I
big
mean,
change.
what a pivot, isn't it? I'm just thinking, hearing your journey,
Yeah,
it sounds to me you were someone who was curious and just
yeah,
wanted to get out there, very quick on
yeah,
learning on the job, on your feet,
yeah,
very good with people. Feels
yeah.
like, a lot of working with people as well. And you sort of landed even with the American Express and M&S gig.
Yeah,
You were already in the cusp of, dealing with cohorts of of specific customers with a high spend. And, when we look at segmentation now, that's sort of what we're doing on a digital space, but actually seeing your customers and understanding that must have been, that's a whirlwind, from
It was
uni to that. Yeah.
genuinely, it was an absolute whirlwind because I mean, I'd left university, had to find a job, had to find something to live, all these other things, and then I got this role, and I mean, to your point about segmentation and analytics, and I'm really kind of getting, you had to understand how to compete by hand with the Sunday Times. So, things like indices and coverage and, the sample sizes. I mean, really, you had to understand the science of it. And so it always makes me laugh now when I speak to entrepreneurs and people who come out of big advertising media agencies in particular, who stand there and they tell you about this absolutely remarkable way that they have built out these bespoke cohorts of customers and so. And I'm just looking at them and going, mate, I was doing this 35 years ago. I mean, by hand. I mean, it is very, very important, but it's also really important to understand the actual why it's important rather than being so clever to say, oh, I can do this, because
Yeah.
actually, why are you doing it is the real question. Because if if you do not understand what value is to your advertiser or your customer or whoever you're working for, frankly, it's just your ego spouting numbers. And I think we have far too much of that in the
We've gone
industry.
too far, I think.
Yeah, we've got to get back to where is the emotional connection with your
Mm.
consumer, right? Because and once we got into, so I come from I mean, there's no denying it, and I'm not embarrassed about it at all. In fact, I think it's one of my greatest strengths because I understood what the meaning of advertising was, why it was important. It's all about giving somebody an opportunity to immerse themselves in some entertainment. And and as an advertiser, you are there, you're in that experience, you're in that moment. If you can sort of ride the wave of their emotional positivity, then brilliant. And that's really been a very, very first principle of how advertising works. Whereas what I think what happened in programmatic in particular, still continues today, is that we turned it all into impressions and forgot about any kind of connection with the consumer. And
Yeah.
I've been an outspoken critic of some of the practices that have been going on with ad tax, etc., in the land in the land of la digital land. But I do think that it's now come back to bite us, and I think also there's so many different ad techs that are now required. Everything from your verification, from your botware, from your, and now increasingly, this is the holy grail of targeting, and this is the holy grail of identity. And I feel it's just completely diluted, and it's just become the most irritating experience for a consumer, and they're switching off. And well, we know this. So yeah, I mean, I think that I still feel very, very positive about innovation and how the human beings, creative human beings, will drive like the consumer experience. But I feel that we have taken um, taken liberties with the consumer, and they're just not playing ball with us in the way that we once were. I also think we've lost a lot of very kind of like open-minded people to who were engaging in different debates because with journalism through the the rise of what was called at one time the kind of, they're now they're basically the people on social media who see themselves as citizen journalists, but in effect are often peddling extreme views and conspiracy theories in their pursuit of clicks and likes and so on and so forth, because that's what
And without the actual facts and the research,
yeah
things to back it up, sort of what we learned. And you want to
100.
argue your point. What are these points that you're arguing, and what are you using to justify that? I feel like that's sort of gone out the window. And obviously, the internet is not regulated in a space.
Yeah.
Just circling back to your career journey and hard work, tenacity, at what point do you then say, I think I've got something going here in the advertising space?
Yeah.
At what point did you say, okay, I think this is something that I can continue? And what inspired you to then sort of
You're gonna
move
love
to the
this story.
digital aspect?
You're gonna love this story. This is a true story. So I was working for a company called Fleetway Home and Law, which was owned by a gentleman who's now very infamous, a guy called Robert Maxwell. And
Yes.
it was a huge organization. It was like, at the time, it was like, equivalent to, it was like Murdoch and Maxwell. They owned, they owned publishing, in probably, very large parts of certainly the English speaking world, North America and in Europe and UK, etc. And I was publishing these comic books, as I mentioned, and one of the comics that I was publishing was called 2000 AD, and the guy who's my boss who came from a licensing background, said to me, "We're going to sell this title, the actual IP rights." That come back to the acronym in a minute. Um, and he said, "I'd love you to get involved." And I was like, "Well, I don't know anything about that, but it sounds really interesting." And he said, "Yes, we're going to sell it to people who make films." And within 6 months, we were in Palm Springs, sitting in Sylvester Stallone's home office, and he had written us a check to take the film rights for 2000 AD, and he subsequently made a movie called Judge Dredd, which was about the main character in 2000 AD.
I
And
do remember that movie. It
yeah,
actually it didn't do too well, did it,
no,
Judge?
it didn't. Well, I mean, we did okay out of it.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
I remember
Cha-ching.
we came back with a check which was written by him, and the guy I was working for, he had it framed, and they put it in the reception of the office for a few weeks, for a few days, sorry, so that everyone could see that Sylvester Stallone had bought the rights. But it was quite a PR victory. But what happened was the experience of dealing with very successful, entrepreneurial creatives. And I mean, at this age, I was only about 25 when this was going on, made me realize that, there was a huge opportunity. There were other opportunities around, intellectual property, IP, and, where you could take it and cross platform fertilization. So I was, I kept on getting sort of promoted and getting more responsibility within the organization. And then in those days, like, headhunters did ring you up, and they did actually ask you, did you want to doing a different job? And I mean, I was unusual. Again, there were women in media and advertising, do not get me wrong, but they mainly, you know, they were sort of like on a career trajectory, which would mean that they'd land up, staying in the organization that they were in, and they would become, hopefully they would get to be, a senior manager. Whereas I took a different approach. I decided that I wanted to get as much experience in different kind of like disciplines around media and advertising, because we knew it was changing, and as I mentioned, desktop publishing had been the first revolution, and then in the early 90s something reared its head, which was called the internet. Now, at the time, nobody really knew how to use it. They knew you could write what was an email, and that was in and of itself an absolute like revelation, because my sister was living in Mexico, and I remember writing my very first email to her, because she was a university lecturer. She was teaching at a university, and they had access to the internet. So we had one computer in our building that actually you could write an email on. And it used to take weeks between these letters that we used to write each other, or very expensive phone calls. So that kind of huge exponential sort of change, from letter, weeks and weeks waiting for replies, blah 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 blah, to literally send the email, and seconds later or an hour later or whatever, I would have a reply, was a real like wow. what's going to happen? Because this is real foundational to change that's taking place. So I got into an organization that was trying to be a WPP, and before we knew who WPP were. They were trying to roll up lots of different disciplines and businesses, everything from publishing companies to direct mail to nascent internet. And basically, they'd done deals with a lot of independent companies in the hope that they could then put them on AIM, which is what they did, AIM being the alternative investment market and part of the London Stock Exchange, and then make loads and loads of money. That was the theory. And what happened was they'd done that before I joined them, but they had won a couple of very big contracts, and they wanted somebody with a lot of big client experience, but also who understood the commercial aspect to come in. And I was headhunted for the job, and it was my first real managing director's role. And I was 27 and going on 48, and I thought I was the bee's knees. And I managed to negotiate an Alfa Romeo Spider as my company car. And I thought I was it. And I refer to this period of my life as my knobhead years, because
Oh,
everybody has to have some.
yeah.
And I'm totally and utterly I look back on it and I was like, wow, I must have been such a prat. But I was a very outspoken prat, and I was very senior in the company, and I was very young. So I was constantly getting myself in trouble with these old geezers and these young men who would be sending memos around the building saying things like, could all the women notice that they should not wear black bras under white shirts? It's very distracting for the men. That is a true story. I have got
Memo.
many worse tales I could tell about that place, but I'm not going to go there because I wouldn't want to make your listeners' ears bleed too much.
There's a bit
Happened,
of pressure there, isn't it? Because it's your first MD role.
yeah,
It's a time where, you're in an industry which is male dominated. You're
very.
having to prove yourself. You were probably very good at your job, but there's this added layer of you're a woman, you're young. It, there's been also a lot of pressure. No?
Oh my God, it was intense, and I think that's why I said about the knobhead years, because you kind of have to. There's two, like a lot of people suffer from uh, you know, emperor's new clothes. I'm an impersonator. Somebody's going to work out I shouldn't be here, and I
I'm
can
gonna find you
actually,
out.
I can actually, remember saying to a guy called Zeb Aram, who was a very smart guy and a client of ours. I said, I don't know how I got here, and he was a really really nice man, and he said to me, Mary, you got here. This is the thing you have to remember. You are now here. Make sure you stay here. You get on. And it was good advice. But you do kind of find ways of coping. So I remember I bought a Gucci handbag, which I definitely couldn't have afforded. But I did it because I thought this shows a symbol to everybody that I'm in charge. Like
Status.
you
Yeah.
know this kind of thing. And why I'm very I'm not critical of myself. I make the point that you kind of have to be more self-aware about the impressions that you are giving to other people, because they can be misinterpreted. And that I think is important, because I think this was a time when women in particular, especially if you weren't senior and you were in an organization where there might have been one or two senior women, they would have seemed really far away from you, very disconnected, because they were encouraged, we as in female leaders were encouraged to behave like men. If you behave, and I actually had my business partner, because I subsequently bought part of this company that I'm referencing. um, he said to me, what you really need, Mary, is a wife. And I mean, I can remember that was like, oh, you think I need a wife? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. But of course, it was just the kind of language of, you're more of a man than I'll ever be in the boardroom, Mary, because I was always very outspoken. What I mean by outspoken was if there was an elephant in the room, i.e., we're losing money on a subsidiary, or the one of our clients isn't paying us on time, or we've got a gang of people working on in a certain part of the organization that are just underperforming massively. I wouldn't just kind of like say, "Oh, this is yes, well done, everybody. It's all good." Well, I would say, "What are we doing to change these things? How are we making ourselves accountable so that we don't get in trouble?" And I think that was a surprise for men and women because we're like, someone's actually saying we need to change and we need to actually improve what we're doing, because leadership isn't it had a style in those days which was very much about just like you were born to lead, and usually you were
Mm.
a bloke and you had a suit on, and you were but they didn't know what to do to kind of lead. It was all about them, and I think there's still quite a bit of that goes on in our in our industry, but I think it is changing. We certainly anything to do with encouraging diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is something that I have been passionate about my whole entire life. I really mean that, because I can't bear unfairness, bigotry, that type of stuff. I was really furious about how women weren't being given opportunities. So I would make it very clear that we had to have diversity around us. And what happened was myself and my subsequently became my business partner realized that the company that we were in was not doing great. So we saw that the opportunity to cherry pick some of the better businesses within this mini WPP, and one of those was Sparfax, which became the world's largest in-flight entertainment business. There was a nascent internet business in the organization, and there was a publishing business. So what we did was we bundled those three together, made an offer to the owner, the PLC management board, and the biggest investor, which was a company called 3i, and we extracted it out and turned it round within 12 months and sold it to WPP. And that was my first big deal. It was a great team of people working on it, and we really knew what we were doing. I mean, it was just like one of those where everybody was watching out for everybody's back. We were all on the same page. Everyone worked very, very hard. It was a super exciting experience. It brought me into contact with finance. We went going into the city raising money. Never done that before. And I think that was, and there's lots of never done that befores in my story. But the point is, once you've done it, whether you fail or you succeed, you learn, right? And that's the most important aspect of this, is that, if you try something, even if it doesn't work, that you'll learn why it didn't work. And learning why something doesn't work is actually the most brilliant of lessons, because then it gives you the opportunity to actually say to yourself, right, if I could go back and do that again, what would we change? Well, how would we approach it? And if I have the opportunity to do it again, how will I approach it this time? So self-awareness is an incredibly important skill to have in terms of becoming successful in your career. And of course, the other thing is, how you measure success is really important too, because again, outspokenly, she said, "I would never be paid less than a man. What are you talking about?
But
Excuse
you were
me."
probably, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Let me assure you, I was not, because I made it my
Ah,
business to know what every man was being paid. And so once I got to once I got to an opportunity where you had transparency, first MD's job, etc. I mean, I knew if a woman was getting paid less than a man. I was like, what is going on here? We cannot have that, because it will cause tension and toxicity. So fast forward to WPP. So we get bought by Martin, and it was Martin who bought us. We, went to the Hayes Muse, we sold it to him, all that 9 yards, and I had to accept a lower salary than my business partner, because he was a man and I was a woman, and that was when it began to go wrong, because it was not that I thought I was better than him. but I sure as hell had a completely different skill set. And I got packed off to the United States to basically grow our organization in America, which is what I did. And I mean, I made all these massive sacrifices personally to ensure that this was a successful acquisition by WPP. And it was good for the company, it was good for my colleagues, it was good for. But actually, what ended up happening was people got very threatened because they didn't know what I was doing in New York, and they didn't know who I was hanging out with, and how come I kept them winning all these airlines when, like they were in London and the Middle East, and they weren't getting the size of deal that I was getting. And of course, what the culture of very large corporations can become very toxic, especially when there's a lot of internal competition rather than focusing on coherent, collaborative approaches to problems and challenges. And so I stuck it out for 4 years. It was very, very tough. It was very lonely, and it made me realize I wasn't a knobhead.
Yeah. And do you think, just hearing you out there, that was probably, would you say that was your notably biggest challenge you faced at the time?
Yeah, yeah, it was awful. It was awful.
Yeah.
It taught me. Sorry, I'm getting emotional.
Okay.
It taught me how, you know, you can, when you bring a lot of love and energy to a project, and you're so passionate about it, and you're like a really tight team, and you really believe in each other, and you're basically every wall or obstacle that you come up against, you find a way around it, you find a way over it, you find a way of knocking it down, whatever it might be. And we were told constantly, you'll never buy Sparfats, you'll never be able to do this, you'll never be able to do this, and we absolutely did all of those things, and we sold it to WPP. So it wasn't like it was some small thing that we were doing. It was a really massive step change. None of us had had experience of buying and selling businesses before, so that was the other thing about it. But when we did it, rather than it becoming like a really, really positive energy experience, it started now we're in Corporateville, we have to behave in a different way. And, we have to think in a different way. We have to protect ourselves, basically, and hide what, the business. Don't be loud. Don't be too successful, because then you get attention from senior management, and they want to know how you're going to do that more and more and more. And of course, me, I was just like, let's go and win loads of new clients on the other side of the Atlantic. Let's go and do it. Let's realize the potential of the business. You'd think those things would be highly appreciated, but they're not always, And I think that's and I think the other thing that was very upsetting for me personally was that I actually had a baby, and that was used absolutely categorically to against me. So literally, I was in hospital, and they came to. I'd had the baby. I'd had my son on the Saturday morning, and my colleagues came to visit me ostensibly on the Tuesday, and they asked me when was I coming back to work.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely what happened. And I mean, a few weeks later, I literally was on a plane to Atlanta to go and pitch an airline with one of my colleagues. And I remember I was thinking, what am I doing? This is absolutely insane. So, the pressure, and of course, the thing then was, I felt, because I'd said, no, I can't do this. And I kind of said, this is just not fair and whatever. It was like, well, you can't hack it. You can't take the pressure. Maybe it'd be better if you just went. And of course, then I realized what was really going on. My former business partner just basically was doing his own thing. So, that was that. So I
Yeah.
was out.
I mean, I hear these stories so much, and I grew my career also while raising them
Mm,
and working long hours, and just you sort of think, is this really how it should be? And obviously being overlooked for promotions because it was like, oh, she's a mother, she probably doesn't want to to grow in that role. It's crazy. It's like, how do you know actually what I want to do? You never asked me, and
Yeah,
my
but
competencies should actually speak more versus what's going on in my home. So
I always made the assumption that if I didn't get in there and make it absolutely crystal clear to everybody, I actually want to be in charge. I want to do
mhm.
this. I want to make this happen. Because I spoke very plainly about how, and and I wanted, I wanted to actually build something. I'm very, very clear to them whereas I think a lot of my former colleagues and peers were that they wanted to be appreciated, and they felt that they needed the permission of the senior management or whoever the recruiter was to say, oh, you might be able to do this, why don't you come this way and we'll have a chat. Because the thing was, because they'd had children, or they were having children or whatever, there was a sort of ultimate inbuilt assumption that these people weren't capable any longer. And I
Mm.
think after I left, I mean, I had to sign a horrendous NDA. Now, because it's so long ago, I don't think it's in force anymore. Well, I hope not. But anyway, it is what it is, and I don't care, so it's fine. But what happened was, I spent literally the next 12 months crying because I was just like, I must be really shit. They must have. I mean, I doubted myself. I mean, I really doubted myself. I was like, I'd lost my self belief. I remember I was kind of cleaning in the kitchen, and my then partner was like going, "You'll be fine. Why are you so upset?" I was like, "You don't understand. I put everything I had
Put your
into
soul
making
into
that
it.
deal
Yeah.
happen, making that business happen." So I don't think. I think now, what if I was going back and doing that again, I would just have been in charge, and I would have made sure that financial deal would have just, I would have been in charge. I would
Yeah.
not do that deal again. I mean, don't get me wrong. I work with some incredibly successful male entrepreneurs. One of the things that I think is very good about what my experience is today is it's a lot easier to have a conversation with a man about equality, of equity, or what you deserve. And I mean, I know there's a pay gap, but we have to address that, and you can only do it by speaking to it. You
Hmm.
know, I never understood why a man should earn more money than me. Never. You know,
Yeah.
I am the eldest daughter in my family, and I think that because my parents, we had quite a dysfunctional few years there. I had to kind of corral my brothers and sisters, but I had to kind of like make sure we all, everything went well and all the rest of it. And then I left home very young, and I think those experiences enabled me to be very, very, to grow in resilience, but also to grow in consciousness that that equity is really fundamental. Fairness is fundamental, and it doesn't matter, and it should not matter where you are born, right, or where your parents were born, yeah, or how you got here. If you're doing your job really, really, really well, and you are collaborating with your colleagues, and you're building out the organization, then you should be rewarded, and not told,
And
lucky you're
compensated accordingly.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're not, like, aren't you lucky you're here? I mean, aren't you lucky you're here? No, I'm not lucky I'm here. I got here because I'm really, really good. That's why I'm here, you know? So after that experience, I went into therapy, which was probably the very best thing I've ever done in my life because, as I said, it made me really look at what I had done and what I had achieved. And I remember my therapist sort of saying to me, that's remarkable. You've done really, like, because obviously she thought it was remarkable, and I needed to own success rather than thinking it
Mhm.
was just all good fortune and I got there by happenstance. So, that's another really important point, I think, about being sort of like uh, able to embrace your success and recognize it and acknowledge it, and not and not think, oh, I'm being jazz hands. You're not. You're actually you're being honest about what you're capable of, but also if you're capable of this, ask yourself the question, what more can I do? Could I
What more could you be?
really,
Yeah.
yeah, what more can I be? And I think that question has, kept me sane for the last 20 years because, subsequently, I went on to, build another two companies that we sold. I realized after my last stint as global CEO of Time Out that I really wanted to to basically have much more of a voice in the industry as opposed to running organizations. And
Do you think that was the beginning of you then? I'm just listening that throughout your career you've had some amazing milestones, and let's acknowledge everything you've said. Building businesses, selling businesses, leading businesses as well, and being an early adopter, being keen to learn everything in the industry and accelerating. So really giving you your flowers with that. Let's put it out there. That's just amazing milestones for you as well. And your honesty, I think, in sharing your journey in terms of the challenges that you've had and what that's meant for you. And therapy is something we should all go through and, talk through our demons and come out the other side. I think that that's really important. Pivoting now to saying you want to be a thought leader is what they call it nowadays, isn't it? A thought leader, an agent for change. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's really important to have a voice in the industry, and I was very lucky. Again, luck is part of it because you're in the right place at the right time, but also you make your own luck. And I think to your point around being at the forefront and always interested in what curious and interested in what, that in advertising sales is an acronym which is ABC, always be closing, and my acronym is ABL, always be learning, because by that has always been completely and utterly central to who I am. Because by learning, by understanding complexity, you can disseminate it, and by the dissemination of complexity means that you get a deeper understanding of it. And one of the things that I wanted to do was basically when I got acknowledged publicly by, first of all, the British Interactive Media Association, and then a couple of other organisations started to say, we'd like to give you a gong for your contribution to the industry and so on and so forth. First of all, I mean, I actually did write to and I said, you've got the wrong person. You don't want to give it to me. I can remember thinking, why would they give me an award? I mean, this is like, I'm not over, I haven't retired or anything. But of course, I misunderstood what it was. What they were doing was they were actually saying, it's okay. Here's a badge that you deserve, So in the end, I took it, um, and I've really felt like, I needed to use that to get us back on the radar, because I think since 2016, there's a lot of the confidence in the industry has, been a bit wobbly sometimes. Our place in the global, world of digital and media in general, has been a bit wobbly. And I think this year we have an opportunity to course correct and reset that, and I hope that we do. We need to get our confidence back. We are this without a shadow of a doubt, having been somebody who's worked in the United States a lot over the last 30 years, and in China and elsewhere in the world, the greatest talent I've ever come across has been in this country. We have got an incredibly diverse nationhood, and we should celebrate that at every opportunity, because it gives us an edge that I'm telling you does not exist in Europe at senior level, and in America it's just basically compartmentalized, because it's like we have BIPOC media and we have everything else, etc., etc., etc. Whereas here we have an opportunity to truly develop the leadership of the future, who should not look like me. They should look like the people that we serve, who are the consumer. So I took
Mm.
chairpersonship of the British Interactive Media Association. I then sat on the board of the Internet Commission, which is an EU funded and also partly owned by TAG, the Trust Alliance Group, who to help with how do we regulate online harms and how do we regulate the big tech firms, beyond the associations, because as much as and I'm an advocate of self-regulation, there is so much that's going on in terms of the way that technology is being used to target our children and to vulnerable people, and particularly this technology poverty issue that older people do have, and a lot of younger people do too, because they can't afford technology, or their parents don't understand it for whatever reason. So those are two kind of areas that I'm trying to give back in. I during my career, I spent some time going back to university to do a master's, and I came out of it with a coaching qualification alongside my master's, which is called Human Resources in the Knowledge-Based Economy, and so I coach really fabulous people, which I love doing, and I'm very lucky because those people are in the industry, and they are, a lot of them are women, not all of them, but a lot of them are, and and helping them, supporting them on their journey has really become a big passion of mine, and I love doing that. And then I'm also exec chair at Machine Capital, which is an investment fund that is specializing in artificial intelligence projects. And that, my friend, is one of the most exciting areas that we can possibly be in at the moment, because I think that the connection, that's if you're not in it, you can't really understand how it's going to work in terms of its impact on society. And so those are some areas that I'm very, very passionate about. As you can probably tell, I've still got a bit of energy left, and I've not given up the ghost at all. But my days of running companies are behind me. What I want to do now is be part of the strategic leadership and directional part of this, so that we build better organizations that are, fit for the future of our children and our children's children.
I mean, that's just awesome and amazing. And you've talked about, being a board member of the Internet Commission and just playing a key role in developing, as you've said, digital accountability. How do you foster, when you talk about encouraging change? How do you foster, open conversation? So getting people to talk about the things that matter, and transparency, because it's an industry that's constantly evolving. As we know now, there's AI, but to your point about, safeguarding our older generation who are not as well versed in the internet, but they have to use it for simple things such as banking now. Banks are closing, so they're having to be digital savvy, but also the vulnerability that's there with, young children, who knows what they're looking at on their phone. How do you foster those conversations and, keep the industry going? Because I know there's a lot to be said about being a force for change and having great allies, but do you have some examples of how you're moving the needle, no matter how small that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Internet Commission, and hats off to Johnny Ship, who's the founder of the Internet Commission, who was formerly at O2 Telefonica. He was head of policy at Telefonica, and he could see, that the impact that mobile connectivity was having, because everybody has a mobile. I mean, now, I mean, you see children with tablets, right? But if you know about how the internet works, and you understand how hardware works, you know that there is a vulnerability in every single system, and if there's a determined hacker, and your kids are on or get shown or are introduced to Instagram or any other of the social, Facebook or whatever, it doesn't matter. There is an opportunity for them to be, to be approached and to be vulnerable. And because there's so much metadata that, and ordinary, and I don't mean ordinary, but, consumers who've got real lives and do not think about, ones and noughts and impression data, they're not, they're still not really like, it's just very confusing. And it's a bit of a kind of, for older people in particular, it's totally and utterly alien, because they wrote letters to each other, or they received post, things, important notifications came through. So it came through the post. You didn't have somebody ringing you up. But of course, then when you realize, oh well, people do ring me up from the bank, or they send me text messages, then this whole kind of vulnerability, this point of weakness in the whole kind of security system emerged. So I think two things you have to do, and this is really important, is you've got to put yourself in the room. You've got to say, I've got an opinion here, and I want you to listen to me, because I've been doing this for 37 years, and it really is scary, and something very bad's going to happen. And you've got to be also be prepared to be ignored, because, and you will get ignored for a while. But what happened with the Internet Commission was Johnny Ship said to me, look, you tried to do transparency with Truth, which was this programmatic platform that we attempted to build. He said, I'm trying to bring some transparency to online, harness the Internet Commission, and put some influence on regulators. Would you like to get involved? And I was like, yes, where do I sign up? Because if you're not in the conversation, you cannot make a difference. I think that's really important to emphasize, whether it is in the industry as a whole, or it is on the kind of international stage. So I joined him as an advisor, and I've done that now for the last 6-7 years. This year, in 2024, there will be new developments. And what we did, which I think, again, is important, we have built out a draft regulatory framework that we asked Meta and others to review, to actually engage with. And in the process of doing that, of course, you meet the people. You're not asking them to sign it. You're not asking them to endorse it. You're asking them to discuss it with you. Okay. And I think that approach is a far more successful one, rather than, here's some regulation, bang, now fight me about it. So you get all of Google's lawyers suddenly on the case. That's not what the Internet Commission does at all. It's not Johnny or any of the other very
It brings people to the table to have a
let's
discussion.
That's right. How we've got to do something here. We're all good humans, okay? We've all got a place in society. How do we, how do we? So it's negotiate, discuss. It's a facilitation that is then used to help with policy. It's used to help with online safety guarding. Is also used from a reputational perspective, because if you've engaged, if you've agreed, if you now know that you're doing something which is going to help people be protected, then it is a very powerful kite mark almost. So I think that it is very, it's essential to ensuring that change happens. And I mean, Dogma is something that we are seeing everywhere we go, and rising above that dogma and putting people who would, I'm not a GB News person, shall we put it that way? So for me, I want to speak to somebody who's passionately conservative, believes in conservative values, believes in the power of conservatism in our society, etc., etc. I want to be engaged with that person, because I know that that person wants to protect this country and to make sure that our people are not in danger. Now, I don't want to speak to if they want to speak to me about how we make this better, then we're going to be a very, very powerful force. But we've lost sight of debate, and we've lost sight of cooperation in so many aspects of society over the last few years. We've got to get back to it, because it's destroying our brand. It's destroying the sense of what Britishness is and how strong it can be. And it's also diminishing our credibility as a force of creativity and innovation, and being really, really good at what we do.
Yeah. Getting back to just looking at actual problems and how can you solve them, whether you're reverse engineering the results that the problem has caused. So looking at, okay, this is what's happened. Let's work our way back to what we could have done differently versus pointing the blame and saying
Yeah,
we can't change or these are the things that are
yeah,
inhibiting our going back to just solving problems that probably the data can't tell us, that we just need to think, creatively and pragmatically. And to your point, bringing people around the table, need to get back to that for sure.
yeah. We do, but I think there's also another aspect of this, which is probably my biggest criticism in of the industry, is we need to start. We need to recognise and acknowledge that we are not delivering the type of growth that advertisers and brands have to they have to deliver so that they survive and they thrive. And there needs to be much more the metrics surrounding success in terms of what we do in the industry are really open now, I think, for massive disruption.
Mm,
Um, I think we're going to see a lot of bad stuff because that will come with artificial intelligence and bad actors that are in the space. We've got to think strategically now about how we take control of that and ownership of that and make sure that we're all talking about it openly. And I think there's a huge amount of responsibility on the leaders of our organizations of the major organizations, such as the big technology companies, the not so big technology companies, but also the media in general, that we are really emphasizing the importance of rigor in analysis, and also in talking about what could the future look like, rather than just concentrating constantly on, we've done these things and we've ticked all these boxes and we're just really good, because that actually is just nonsense. You've changed nothing. If you're not prepared to actually change, then we will be in trouble, because it's not going to go away. And I really think that the disaffection that consumers are exhibiting in their, dropping off in droves. And also there's movements within, the youth, that people just feel really disillusioned with life, and that's terrible. I mean, the mental health issues that our young people are struggling with, and just the pressures and the misunderstanding of, what is it to be, like in a workplace, what does it mean? Does my work have any meaning? I mean, one of the things, like I said at the very beginning when I talked about, those first early days of my career, once I worked out that what we were doing was basically we were part of the entertainment, of the consumer, or part of the information experience of the consumer, then I had a context, and it gave me meaning, and it meant that, I wanted to make sure that was a really good thing. It also allowed me to, discover and exhibit and utilize my own creativity. And I think these are things that now our young people, they need the version of it, I think we're not tapping into this incredible positive energy that should exist in our young people. Instead, we're asking them to be, data input monkeys, and you know what I mean. They're not getting the value that they're not getting the value out of the experience of working.
I see it now when you see it with roles being advertised or industries. It's now become very, like you said, linear in terms of,
Yeah.
I don't think people can sidestep anymore and say, you know what, actually, I've got transferable skills here. I'd like to try a different industry. It's so rigid where even when you talk to recruiters and headhunters say, oh no, the brief, we have to follow the brief. And I'm saying, what
Yeah,
happened to diversity of thought, diversity of talent,
absolutely.
creativity, work experience, actually just being a hustler, someone who says, do you know what? I think
Yeah.
I can do this job.
Yeah,
Give
yeah,
me
yeah.
a chance. Let's,
100%.
yeah, that's all gone.
100%. 100%. Like, I mean, I went from American Express and Marks and Spencer's to Judge Dredd in 2000 AD. I mean, like that today. I mean, and what a roller coaster ride. But it all was related and relatable, because what was I in those days? I mean, and still am, I should say, in lots of different ways. Shape shifting and
Yeah.
reinvention are vital to remaining interested, stimulated, and learning. Right? I mean, this kind of pompous thing about we as an organization are committed to lifelong learning for all of our employees. But if you won't let them experience different aspects of the organization, or you won't invest in training them, which I think is one of the saddest things, that, training budgets are now kind of called different things, because it then
Or
ticks,
they've been slashed.
or they've just been slashed. So, that
Yeah.
that that is a really, really awkward situation. And I think there's a lot of emphasis and pressure, expectation on, charitable organizations or non-profit social enterprises, whether it's Creative Equals, Digi Learning, the guys at Brixton Finishing School, etc., etc. And there are many of these. Not, I'm not just saying one flavour fits all, but these guys who are people who've worked in the industry, really understand the industry, whatever, and leading it, and they're going around with begging bowls, asking, large corps to give them some money so they can actually get diverse people into the industry, on the behalf of those big opcos who keep on telling us that they're ticking all the boxes, and they're bringing these people in. The reality is, that we've got to be. There are absolutely people in the big opcos who are doing a great job in encouraging that. But when you think about it, it's a very small. We as an industry need to really kind of like say focus on that and make it a metric that we measure all the time and say we are improving or we're not, and it's something we should all be holding ourselves to account. But it's hard to to make change happen when there's there's always pressure on you to exhibit and evidence significant growth. And obviously the media landscape in particular has really had a bit of a troubled 12 months, and the next 12 months ahead are probably not going to be smooth riding. I just think they'll be a lot better by the end of the year.
Yeah. So, holding to account, we're in 2024. Obviously, women are listening to this podcast. Impressed by your journey and lots of lessons learned about, the acronym always be learning and always be moving, being a
Yeah.
shapeshifter, and just acknowledging your talents and skills and believing yourself. I feel like networking, mentorship are so crucial for career growth. And what what advice do you have for people now in this day and age to build meaningful connections, whether it's because it's for their career or they're looking for to be on a board or they're trying to change industry? What advice would you give for the lady today who's navigating?
Well, I think the two things I would say are, if you can, if you can, get yourself a coach. If you can't, for various, financial reasons, whatever, then find yourself a group of mentors, and try. And when I say a group of mentors, because people are giving their time for free, that you've got to be respectful of how much time they can give you, and also specifically what areas they can help you with. So, for example, if you want to move out of I don't know, client services, or you really want to find a role where sustainability is going to be a key part of your job, and your responsibilities, then you need to plan for that so you can be successful. Because what I've found a lot recently when talking to women in our industry, they tell their line managers that they want to get into DE&I, and they want to be much more part of how we build the business of the future culturally, and so, and they just get it added onto their jobs. which is not really the best way of making these things happen. Sure, personally, I would say carry on with your day job and find an organization outside of your company where you can give your spare time, or you can give some time to help that charity or that not-for-profit to, or profitable, doesn't matter to me. I mean, like if you want to volunteer to help them with strategic direction on their digital strategies or whatever that plays to your strengths, but allows you to then learn about what is happening in that space, and you get some experience that you can put on your CV, and you're not coming to it, and to your point, you're making connections in that space. One of the things that I was never afraid of was getting out and going out and meeting new people. And I really, I cannot, tell you how important that is to successful progression. You need to talk to people. You need to ask for introductions. I mean, you need to be, like people send me people all the time. They say, like, I met this guy, I met this woman, whatever. They're doing this new business. They're doing this new project. Would you take a look at it would you have an opinion on it? And I think, if you give people 30 minutes of your time, two things happen. One is you get them, they tell you, this is what we're doing and what we're trying to challenge with. You can have an opinion about where you could help them, or you can pass them on to somebody else who can help them, right? And I think these are very important skills to learn. Now, and ask yourself, okay, why would anybody help me if I won't help them?
It's
Yeah,
give and take, isn't it?
right. Now,
Yeah.
and I think there's also this there's a kind of assumption that when you've gotten to MD level, or wherever, you're at that level, that all right, I've arrived now. Well, you've reached that mount, you've got to that top of that mountain. But as my former clients at Singapore Airlines used to say, when you get to the top of the mountain, Mary, you need to look out and see where's the next peak. And it is very important to review yourself, and that's why a coach sometimes is a good thing, but a mentor is a very good thing, or a very good friend can do it with you, where you can say, well, I'm here now, right, and I'm doing this, and where's next? And is it, I'm going to grow the business so that we have a new division in France or in the United States or MENA or wherever it might be, or is it going to be that we're going to start doing new products and services or whatever, or is it going to be that actually I want to do X, Y, and Z in the next 3 years, and that maybe means I don't want to be a full-time MD or whatever it might be. If you don't ask yourself questions and you don't review yourself regularly, right, then you can stagnate. And I think that is a really big challenge, because we have an expectation in this industry in particular that we're constantly, like, we're on it, on it, and we move so fast and so at such urgent speed, that unless you are kind of aware of what is going on and having some dialogue with people about it, you're not going to get there. I mean, I am really lucky, right? I'm a member of a number of WhatsApp groups which cover everything from creativity and artificial intelligence through to D&I, all the things that I'm interested in. And I'm also I'm one of the people on the Digital Leading Ladies WhatsApp group, which is a fantastic resource and a wonderful network of absolutely, truly amazing ladies. So I think that's another aspect of this. Make sure you're in the conversations, and even if you haven't got the time to post or whatever, that you can listen. You can always find out what's going on, and if something strikes you, you are there. But you've got to give yourself time to be in the conversations. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to next year. I'm going to be doing more networking." And the kind of networking you do needs to be right for you. And it's not necessarily like, as I mentioned, jazz hands. I mean, I speak a lot publicly, and that's kind of part of brand MKD, because as I mentioned, I've been always outspoken, but that's not everybody's shtick, and it shouldn't be. People who are not extrovert, don't want to be on a stage or whatever, that's fine. You know what? That doesn't mean that they're not really, really good at what they do. What they need to, but what I would advise them to do is to quietly pick off people they've seen or heard of or whatever, and ask them for a coffee, you know? And you will be surprised at how many people will just say,
Will
absolutely.
say yes.
When do
Yeah.
you want to meet or whatever? Because that anyone who's in this industry for long enough or smart enough about it knows that it's a quid pro quo. You'll build your network, you have conversations, you learn as much as you can from each other, and then something will come up, and it will maybe that you having a chat with a new startup or a scale up, or an investor contacts you or whatever it is, and you kind of go, oh yeah, you know what, I was talking to somebody the other day that was really, really interesting business, or I met somebody who might be a very good chief operating officer for you, and they might not be that happy where they are at the minute, whatever. Now, back in the day, we had it was a different world, and we had these things called recruiters, and people used to tap you on the shoulder and say, look, come out of that queue and join my queue, whatever. But the world has changed. LinkedIn has revolutionized the whole space of recruitment. Use LinkedIn as a tool. It's not going to get you a job. You're going to get your next job. You're going to get your next career move. But it's a good tool, and that's what it is.
I think definitely you've just highlighted some really good nuggets there. And the fact that one thing that stuck with me is you have just immersed yourself in all the different things that interest you. And that's the way you stay abreast of what's going on in terms of trends, disruptions,
Yep.
technology, media, AI. You've sort of plunged yourself in there and said, right, what's happening? What's going on? Does this also inform you in terms of the consulting and the advisory roles you decide to take on as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I get to work on incredibly interesting projects, which I'm sure I mean, I'm doing something in football at the moment. And, you know, when, you know, and I think, when I was asked by Chris Perry to become the exec chair of Machine Capital, I know that put a few blokes' noses out of joint, because they would have loved to have done that. And in fact, one of them said, I don't know why he didn't ask me. I would have done it. He said it to my face. And I looked at him and said, well, he didn't ask you. He asked me. That's why I'm doing it. I mean, it's kind of weird, that there's still this sort of assumption. I mean, absolutely, football is still very clearly a very male dominated. But I have a different set of skills that come to the table. And I mean, I did actually publish The Eagle, which was the Roy of the Rovers which is a footballer comic book many, many years ago. So maybe it was always destined to be. But you do understand that by having a lot of different experiences, you actually have a lot of different perspectives that you can bring to the more straightforward, or what might appear to be quite straightforward. I don't ever enter into things too much with too many assumptions. You need to understand that things can be different, and there's different perspectives that can take place, and also that other people's perspectives are really important. So testing your ideas out is quite a useful thing to do, in my experience. And
Yeah,
also,
and also if you go in with assumptions, then there's no room for diversity of thought
correct.
or change or step changing. It's just an all out the window, isn't it?
Well, this is why it's important to test your assumptions and have those conversations with as many different stakeholders as you possibly can, rather than just a small group of people that you may work with on a day-to-day basis. So, I still think that talking direct, addressing the consumer around what we're doing is, you learn so much, and I think it also brings a lot of insight to your narrative when you are pitching, whether it's media companies or whatever. But it's that principle operates on whatever. If you're a nascent or a new entrepreneur and you are looking to raise money, actually being able to tell those investors that you have spoken to the consumers and your potential customers, and they have verified that this is a good idea and that they would buy it, or they would do it, or they would use it, or whatever. That these are really important life skills that in business you need to have, because, and I go right the way back to the beginning again with those, those TGI books, as they were books in those days. Understand, talking to people about your ideas is actually 9 times out of 10, like that's what leads to the next conversation, because you had an idea, or you thought about something. Like I said, when we look to buy Sparfax, and people go, "You're not buying Sparfax. How could you buy Sparfax?" But we'd worked out how to do it, and we'd spoken to really, like influential people, and they had said, "Yeah, we'll back you, we'll help you, we'll do these things." And because we hadn't just sort of gone, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea, but it'll never happen." We hadn't gone straight from good idea to that's shit. It's not going to happen because we can't do it. You have to have self-belief. And even though I did have, experience of losing my self-belief, I think that process meant when I got it back, it stuck. It wasn't just I wasn't in imposter syndrome. I was actually right. No, I know I can do something. I can make a difference, and and I want to do this in a good and positive way, not in a negative, toxic, political way.
Yeah.
And I think that journey led me to being somebody who's not afraid to walk away when things are crap.
Mm, yeah. And it's that self-audit, isn't it, that we have to do from time to time. What
We
have we
do.
learned? What are we good at? What was
We do.
rubbish? Where do I need help? Where do I need support? I mean, just hearing your journey and talking about, you are a true advocate for women, whether it's
Mhm.
with your digital leading ladies WhatsApp group, or being a board member of the TLA's Women in Tech. It's really good to see someone who's not just walking the talk, but actually doing the do. So you are you're a shapeshifter in the industry.
Oh,
Circling back to women and tips, Mary,
yeah,
the
sure.
MKD brand
Yeah.
and person.
And
What 3 tips would you give to women out there? So trailblazer takeaway tips, summarizing your journey, your story. What tips would you give?
my number one tip is find something you love and do that. You only live once, so make a difference. Because if you do that, you will be a lot more satisfied. You will contribute to our society and to our culture. And whether you are, a mother or a sister or a daughter or whatever, there are people around you who are the people you love, the people that you care about, and your friends that you can impact in a positive way. So and it also matters to be happy, right? And I don't mean the sort of happiness of self-help books. I mean the happiness of fundamental volition, and knowing that you are responsible for making your life, making your life and doing good work. Because I think if you don't like what you do, you can land up in a very, very painful world of stress and unhappiness. I think the second thing I would say is find your people. And what I mean by that is work with people who want to see you do well, and that you want to see do well, and make it your business to be positive about helping people on their road to their career. I mean, I still see people that I haven't worked with for many, many, many years, because we had the best of times together and we helped each other. And I think that you having that connectivity all those years later, when they celebrate you on LinkedIn, or they drop you a note saying, "Gosh, I read you did something," or "I heard you did that," or whatever, and it's a quid pro quo again. Like knowing you've got the support of people that you work with, many in other companies and other organizations, is a very, very positive experience. And then finally, I think, please, please, please always be learning, because by always be learning, you will never go out of fashion. You will never go out of date. You'll always be able to make a contribution, have an opinion and a perspective. And as long as you're able to do that, you can have a significant impact on both your careers and the careers of people around you. And that is good for our economy, and it is very good for our industry, but it's very good for you personally, because it's where you realize, I didn't even know that I could do that, or that I wanted to do that. It's really important to keep your mind sharp and to always be, inquisitive, because asking people, how does that work? I mean, I'm going to not tell the name of the company, but I had a conversation not that long ago with one of these sustainability, carbon neutralizing technologies that they're in the market. And as soon as I started interrogating it, I realized not a hope in hell this is real, because it's not real.
Mm.
Right? And actually, what they're doing is just burning more carbon to be able to say they're offsetting your carbon footprint. So by knowing the questions to ask, that comes with experience, but it also means that you don't land up getting yourself in hot water by saying, "Oh yeah, this must work," because you weren't afraid to challenge the assumptions that were being made. Now, I think that is increasingly more the philosophy of people in our industry, that they do challenge, which is good. But I also think that we should encourage one another to challenge and compare notes. And as I said, beware the echo chamber. It's a very dangerous place to go.
Mary, this has been a very lovely conversation. There's so much knowledge. You are definitely someone we need to be having more conversations with. And your journey has been really inspiring. I hope you, even just talking about it, gave you time to reflect as well of your achievements, your accomplishments, your curiosity for things, for industry, for people, your passion for diversity of thought and inclusion, and just being a badass woman. I think this has been really great.
Well, you too. Right back at you, lady. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I really have enjoyed speaking to you. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege. And yes, very, very happy that we finally got here. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I think the next one is definitely to grab a coffee. I think that should be
Yes,
on the next
that would be
list.
definitely a great pleasure for me too. I'd love that, Until. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.